Good morning, Warsaw. Today is Tuesday, 15th of August. It will be cloudy with sunny spells with highs of 16 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 5:34 a.m. and sunset at 8:18 p.m. We are on the 15th day of the Warsaw Uprising. For the past 21 years, we have celebrated today as Armed Forces Day, even though we are currently in the middle of the uprising. The celebrations continue among the sounds of gunfire and explosions. Alina, tell us more about what else is happening.
Yes, thanks for that, Philippe. Yes, we will be talking more about Armed Forces Day, which is today. And before we get to that, let's talk about what's going on the ground. Claire, you're going to kick us off there.
So day 15, 15th of August, they've now been fighting for over 2 weeks. And of course, the old town is still under constant attack. And the battle is continuing across the rest of Warsaw as well, with building to building fighting and houses, tenement houses constantly changing hands even throughout a day. By the end of this day, the Germans will return to their initial positions. There's been at least 150 of them killed and 5 German tanks destroyed. But 15th of August is also special because it's Armed Forces Day, isn't it, Alina?
It is. It's still Armed Forces Day till today. It was established, back in the interwar period in 1923. And it was chosen because this is when the Poles launched their counter-offensive against the Russians. And it's just this great, important day in Polish history. And it was still commemorated and celebrated during the Warsaw Uprising. This is what I find absolutely incredible, that they were able to do this. It was a day that was solemn. There were speeches. There was a mass held on one of the squares. It was conducted by Bishop Stanisław Adamski. There was so many photographs taken of this event, and also film footage that you will find that was shown actually at the Palladium in one of the reels as well. And people would sing songs. There were press war reporters.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was solemn, it was important, but it was also celebrated in other ways, wasn't it? It was kind of a humanising day in a sense, and really important for morale. The fact that, Poland has not been lost. They are fighting for Poland. And part of that is to continue to celebrate the traditions that they've had that are so important for the patriots of Poland. So they do other things to recognise it as well. They have performances by artists. They have groups singing songs together and bringing everybody in. They have special meals prepared. It might just be soup, but it's better soup than usual. And they have some cake, and they have real coffee, which has been unseen for a week. And of course, the soldiers get extra rations as well. So one of them remembered receiving 10 cigarettes and 3 small sweets, which meant an awful lot. They also some of them get extra marmalade and soap as well. So you can see these sort of luxury items have been saved up. They might seem quite modest to us today, but it's hugely symbolic. There have been obviously, shortages of all these things. So it really emphasises the special nature of the day, and with it, the spirit of the Polish people still being alive, that they have not been defeated.
It's very interesting that we're talking about Armed Forces Day, because the Polish Armed Forces were made up of more than just the Poles during the uprising. Claire, tell us a little bit about what other nations are taking part.
Well, this is one of the most extraordinary things. In fact, the Warsaw Uprising was this incredibly international uprising. There were people from so many different nations involved, and some of those are, of course, a prisoner of war. We have downed pilots who have escaped from the Brits. We have all sorts of different nations, but perhaps one of the most surprising is the representation from Germany. So there are 2 key deserters from Germany who joined the Warsaw Uprising on the side of the Poles. One of them is Louis Węgiel. He's a deserter from the Luftwaffe, and he's fighting in the ranks of a Polish battalion, but he is actually killed on this day, the 15th of August. And there's another deserter from the German army. He's a non-commissioned officer, an NCO of the Luftwaffe, Willy Lampe. He joins a Polish group operating in the area of Królewska Street. And initially, what he did was he taught the Home Army soldiers how to operate the German weapons that they'd stolen or captured from the Wehrmacht and from the SS. So this is incredibly useful to have someone from that enemy army now training your men in their resources. And then later he is delegated to serve under Monter, who is commanding the uprising for the Poles. So as well as the very practical use of his knowledge and expertise, this is another thing that is obviously very important for the morale of the Poles. And what else is affecting Polish morale?
You already touched on this a little bit, Claire, and that is theatre and plays and things. So today, on this day specifically, the premiere of a cantata for the opening of the National Theatre takes place at a cafe on Mazowiecka Street. The director of the show is Leon Schiller. We will come back to him in a minute. The show is actually interrupted by a bombing. There was a German attack with mine throwers, and of course, because of such a ferocious attack, the building is set on fire. This play was quoted as the most extraordinary theatre that has ever been seen in their life, which was wrote by the Pope Stanisław Ryszard Dąbrowski. This was a place of morale. It helped insurgents to get away from daily life of what was happening in reality, of the bombings, the regular bombings, the fear, the executions, the murders, and just the Warsaw Uprising in general. What I just want to touch on a little bit more about is actually Leon Schiller, because during the uprising he actually led a theatre brigade, which we just talked about, one of the plays that was put on this day, and they would stage productions at the front line, which was incredibly important for morale. And after the uprising collapsed, Schiller, who was a second lieutenant in the Home Army, he was taken to a prisoner of war camp, and there he even carried on with his theatrical activities and continued to write various different plays. And he was liberated by the US Army. He then moved towards the Dutch border, where he set up another Polish theatre under the patronage of the Polish YMCA. He managed to produce many, many, many different theatre plays, and he showed them in a number of venues within the occupation zone in Germany as well as Holland.
I just find it absolutely extraordinary. This is a city that is being besieged. Half of it is in flames. Every day there are significant numbers of fatalities. And yet we have a theatre production company staging a new production in the middle of the city centre. It's just that it just shows the spirit of the Poles, who completely refuse to be crushed. I mean, they are defending every building. At the same time, they are defending their traditions, their customs, their theatre, their culture. This is what it meant to be Polish, and it's absolutely remarkable.
I just want to add one more thing before we finish on this, because you just brought this to mind. There's photographs, incredible photographs of a puppet theatre for children that took place during the Warsaw Uprising, like a Punch and Judy, to basically entertain these kids that are literally sitting through a war zone, and to increase
to distract them, to keep them going. To help them to survive. And is that puppet theatre, is that taking place in the cellars and basements underneath the city? Is this
No, this one actually takes place in one of the courtyards, and it's really interesting. These kids are all crowded around and they're doing a live puppet show. I think it's fantastic.
All of this brings to mind, of course, the opening line of the Polish national anthem, which is one of the most sort of downbeat opening lines of a national anthem, which basically says, "Poland is not yet lost, so long as we still live." And I think this is a nice indication of that sentiment.
Exactly. Look, Roger, you haven't spoken much on this episode. Let's get you speaking a little bit. So we're going to stick with the idea of propaganda, morale, and everything else. So we've talked about what's happening in Poland or in Warsaw at the time. What is happening outside of Warsaw? What are the foreign powers doing?
Well, there was a significant development with the Soviets on the 15th of August, which is that you will remember that yesterday, on the 14th of August, the TASS, the Soviet news agency, made an announcement where Soviet authorities distanced themselves from the rising, saying that it hadn't been instigated by them, and they considered it to be to have gone off half-cocked and to be the work of adventurers. There's another significant development in that direction, in that sort of distancing process on this day. There's an announcement by the assistant to the People's Commissars. This is Wyszynski, who later is a very significant individual in Soviet politics, who sent a message to the American ambassador Avril Harriman in Moscow, saying that the Soviet government would not permit American and British aircraft to land on Soviet territory. Now, this is significant because, as we know, and we've talked about, the British or Allied air forces are doing, or attempting to do, quite a lot of airdrops on Warsaw. And that's a process that is made much more difficult because Warsaw is effectively right at the end of their range. So what would make life a lot easier for them would be if they can do their airdrops and then land on Soviet-controlled territory further to the east and then be refueled and return and so on. So it would make the logistics of the operation much easier. But, of course, the Soviets object to that proposal initially, and this is the announcement by Wyszynski basically expressing that. And he says they decidedly object to British or American aircraft after dropping arms in the region of Warsaw, landing on Soviet territory, since, he says, the Soviet government does not wish to associate itself either directly or indirectly with what he calls the adventure in Warsaw. So this is another stage in that, not only distancing themselves from the Warsaw Rising, but also making the supply and the sustenance of the Warsaw Rising that much more difficult for the Allies.
So, Roger, as you've spoken about the Soviets, I think you might as well continue. What are the Germans doing at the same time?
The SS commander in Warsaw, Erich von der Bach-Zelewski, he returned to the city, and he there's a rather nice sort of diary entry from that we can use from him. He says, "Since yesterday, I've been back in the Warsaw area after returning from Lutzen. There are still very heavy fights and great losses, but we are slowly moving forward. I am now the general in command of the Warsaw area," he says, "and everything is subordinated to me. The army, the SS, the police, and the civil administration. The Reichsführer SS, Heinrich Himmler, again promised me the Knight's Cross if Warsaw was captured."
It's just that it is interesting that you have, on one side, the destruction of an entire city of hundreds of thousands of people, including women, including children, non-combatants. And on the other side, you have the promise of a medal. That was how things were being weighed in the balance here.
And it seems that's only what he seems to care about, is getting that medal, because it's going to be a very incredible, I don't know, a leg up for him, I guess.
But he must have known as well that once they had taken Warsaw, they weren't going to keep it. At this point, they must know, with the Red Army right on the other side of the river, that after that they are going to be moving back. So we are literally talking about honours rather than sort of concrete long-term strategy here.
Well, that's the end of episode 15. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow for episode 16. And don't forget, if you do like us, please make sure to head to your favourite listening platform and rate us.